Okay, today I want to introduce you to Sherry Hatfield and Cherie Hatfield, and Sherry Sweeney is with us also. She'll be jumping in. And what's so exciting about today with Cherie is I've only recently run into her. I've talked to her for several hours at this point, and I'm real excited about what she has to offer. So. Sherry and I have figured out what causes paranoid schizophrenia. We know what to do with it. We know how to cure it. We know how to get rid of the voices. But one of the problems we had was that the traumas that build up in the life of schizophrenics, which are more than abundant. I mean, it's very clear that trauma feeds into it along with methamphetamine and drugs. I mean, those are the two things that cause it. It isn't any chemical imbalance. They've disproved that. Psychiatry is just trying to get away with that to sell medications. There is no chemical imbalance. They don't even know what the chemical balance of the brain should be, and they're just fabricating all these lies to suck in money. But it it doesn't work. Those medicines will suppress the symptoms. They don't cure anything. They are toxic. They're neuroleptics. They shrink the brain and they rot out the peripheral nervous system with long-term use, and it's permanent neurological damage. They cure nothing. Psychiatry doesn't know the cause of schizophrenia. They don't know the cure. They don't know what to do with it. Basically, they're drugging the brain. They're not working with the spirit. As far as they're concerned, spirit doesn't come into the equation. Um, and the same thing with psychology. I mean, I spent 4 years in undergraduate psych and another 4 years in graduate school in psychology and counseling, and they did not touch spiritual issues at all. So basically it was just this rational stuff that doesn't work. And both Cherie and I have both been searching for whatever works. So when I was working with schizophrenics, it was whatever worked. It didn't matter what it was. If it worked, I used it. And one of those things was the 23rd Psalm and a number of other things. Sherry's That's a Lie program. But it all came from the study of the psychotic voices, which psychology and schizophrenia have not dealt with at all. They label them hallucinations. They say the only way to deal with this is to drug them, and it doesn't work. And they're making $747 billion a year between psychiatry and big pharma selling these toxic drugs. So the psychiatric mafia does not have our best concerns. They want to make money, and that's what they're doing. They're doing it by poisoning people with their toxic drugs. So between what we know, Sherry and I and Cherie, this is the whole thing. This is the whole enchilada. If you can go in there and get rid of the voices and then remove the garbage that has built up in there, and then get the person on a positive spiritual track, they're free. They're home free. The the thing is, what's so interesting about Cherie's stuff is that um, Maish, who invented this stuff, who thought about it, he's got nothing to do with psychology. Nothing. He was self-educated. He was a merchant marine and a ship captain. He wasn't brainwashed by all this garbage that they teach in the universities. He thought this out for himself. He found that the mind works very differently from the way that the universities teach it works, and that it isn't the mind that processes information, and it is the spirit. The mind it just takes snapshots. So both Sherry and myself have both had sessions with Cherie, and both of us have felt a very noticeable difference. I've started using it in my practice, and it works like a charm. It's very quick, it's very powerful, and it's very simple, and it's amazing. You know, so I can guarantee you it works. It will work for schizophrenics, and it will add to what we have found with regard to the cure for schizophrenia, which the World Health Organization says is one of the top 10 health issues on the planet. You know, and to add to that, they are not searching for a cure. They don't want a cure. They don't make any money from a cure. So what they've done is they've reduced the funding for research for schizophrenia down to virtually nothing. And I'm sure this was due to the psychiatric mafia and big pharma. You know, they want things to go just like they are with these endless treatments that don't cure anything. And they know they're poisoning these people. They know it. You know, they know those medications are bad for them. So I'm pleased to introduce Cherie Hatfield. She's been a practitioner of this for 16 years now, and you know, I can't even comprehend her skill. I mean, so what I'm going to do is turn it over to her, and Sherry and I will be behind the scenes and be asking questions and interacting.
Yeah, Cherie, why don't you introduce yourself? Give us a little bit, give the audience a little bit of information about your background and how you got started in all of this and so on like that.
Thank you, Jerry and Sherry. And there was some very interesting statistics and data there, Jerry, and listening to that that I didn't know of.
Well, their suicide rate for schizophrenics is the same as it is for psychiatrists. It's almost the exact same rate, 3 to 5 times that of the general population. So it's like two sides of the same coin.
Yes, yes. And it becomes quite. Well, look, my name is Cherie Hatfield. I live here on the Gold Coast in Queensland, Australia. So it's lovely to have this type of medium to be talking to Jerry and Sherry and in the United States, and who knows where this video, who we get to communicate with around the world. So one thing to be grateful for as we get sharing a little bit deeper into, I think about what I hear both of you doing, and that's very much what John was about, and then therefore I came towards it, and all those most practitioners and people who've come towards it, is really trying to give people back to themselves. There's an awful lot of power and authority over how we're to be, how we're made up. And look, reading your book, it shows very beautifully the history of mental health and how they started to work with people having these type of experiences and all the things that they tried to use and do over the centuries. I mean, that gives a beautiful premise to it's not all as it seems to be. So my journey started, I was young mother, and by the time I was 21, 22, I went into a severe state of depression. And of course, that experience, there are components within it. You don't realize you're sort of heading there until you come to this, what I would call a place of, I don't want to be here. And it's quite strong. There's no reasoning. There's no people are talking and wanting to help you. You're not interested. There becomes absolutely no interest. And of course, part of the process that I did go through in that was deciding not to be here. Now, in that, so some of this is going to be in hindsight. However, in that process, it was very real. And of course, I was trying to solve the problem that I perceived was a problem. And of course, every time I came up with an answer to the problem, it was, you know, I was married with 2 children. I couldn't even cope with the children coming into my room with all their energy. And so I was like, I'm not a good mother. It's best that I leave. Oh, that won't work because I wouldn't be able to live with myself. Well, I'll live with the children and let Darren have a happy life. Well, that won't work because I can't look after the children. So very rational, but at the time it's very real as you're moving through it. So what happened was there was this point where it came, oh, I'm the problem. I'll take Mia. Now, there was a very interesting state of experience that I had. There was this overwhelming calm. What I got to see later in my life is that overwhelming calm was more that I'd had an answer or a solution to what I perceived was the problem.
And that's common. That's very common.
Yes, and that's why I can see, and it is written, that people have this very peaceful state before they take the act. I understand why. So it feels like all that searching has stopped, and that's a very peaceful state. However, that as soon as I even heard that, decision, I cried, and it was like a cry of relief. But in the crying, I did have an experience. And I heard, Cherie, just look back. I was 22. My rational was going, I've hardly had a life. Look back at what? And I had this overwhelming sensation of a deep understanding of life. I can't explain, there is hindsight, but at the time, it's like I understood it, but I didn't. So it's all part of this whole thing that I was like, oh, I've just lost it. But in that was a beautiful, overwhelming, loving presence, is the only way I could word it. And I fell off to sleep. When I woke in the morning, my throat was like razor blades, and I couldn't even swallow. And so I was a bit like, oh, I've got to go to the doctor. I used to suffer throat infections. It's from a young girl.
And crying, I would suppose, yeah.
Yeah. But here's what's interesting. Here I'd made a non-survival decision, really. But the very nature of me not being able to swallow, I rang the doctor, which is very pro-survival.
Mm-hmm.
I went to the doctor. Of course, that's where things changed. I catharsised in the room, saying all sorts of irrational things. And he said, it's okay, dear. You're in a state of depression. So, of course, that made it worse for me. I'm thinking, now I am really a bad mother. I have to take Valium. Because back then, this is 30 years ago.
Yeah, they like dishing out Valium.
Yes. And he was like, no, we don't do that. It's okay. So he's communicated a little bit about, he said, Cherie, I've known you since you're 16. You're trying to be superwoman. You're trying to do all these things. And, of course, your body's gone. I'm not keeping up. So he did it, and especially back then, it was very different than it is now. Now is a massive market. And so there was this very gentle, we're just going to get you back into balance. That's what these will do. And mountains will come back to molehills. So, but within 3 months, I started to come off the antidepressants because I had this whole experience of high aesthetic feelings and watching my children, my husband, and there was another moment where I had this overwhelming, how did I get there and think all those things, and how am I now feeling these high aesthetic feelings, values? And that question has started my search, and I've been on that path for 30 years. What creates that? How can we be? So life unfolds. And of course, I was been in childcare since I was 16, but I have a chance meeting with a woman. She came and asked me to work in her center. I had not done my training, and she put me through training. So the childcare, there was a book I read called Born to Win. It was the first one I ran and read, and that started to make a lot of sense, that there is an authentic you, and then there are these social identities, if you like, or concepts and beliefs that we take on. The children did become my master teachers because I let go and I let them show me. And that became very experiential. Then life unfolded and I was taken to a meditation class and started to work, so I suppose more the emotional, spiritual component, because nothing is separate. And so I got engaged then into more of what people would call the intangible or spirit, or that which is aware. And so I did that for 15 years full time. And that opened up other doors. What was most interesting for me is I became my own guinea pig. So I was very sincere. I wanted to understand. So, of course, I would use everything that I was learning. And so I did it more through the inner child because of the nature of me working with children for, 10 years. And I got to see some of those components as I healed them within me, understanding that emotional, conceptual concept of self. When that wasn't there, how that interrelated with the children. which was an amazing dynamic. So, of course, you could lean that into when you're thinking negatively or there's a negative vibe, you're going to have that received. Negatives create negatives. When you don't have it, the positive flows of energy naturally communicate, and there's this natural positive flow. The children showed that authentically and could also show me if mine wasn't, because you can't think this.
Yeah, children are so real. Yeah.
Absolutely. They also showed me that that's where I began, where we all began.
Mm-hmm.
Every single one of us. And there is a nature and a presence that is spontaneous, open, truthful, all these things we seek. So when I started to come into more the esoteric or the spiritual, it says, you already are what you seek. So it's like I could see it on a very physical, practical reality, and then from that premise. Anyway, doing the work, there were many insights that I had, because the I I'm talking about is the awareness. We know we exist, and we're also aware that there's a problem, or I'm aware of that voice. I'm aware of this feeling. I'm aware. So there has to be an essential self or awareness, there's many names for it, to be aware of that. So if you are aware of that, you can't be that. So that was it was like, oh, whoa. And of course, I used many other different tools, and I was working with other clients. But what I found, and also what John Mace found, was there's this cycle, this pattern, and it would show up. You may have understood it, and there may be a beautiful, clear runway, but it would show up somewhere else. And it's like, oh, what is that again? And it was only through a crisis 16 years ago, a very personal crisis, that I basically resigned from everything I was doing. It was, I thought I had lost it. I was emotionally out of control. And with all the concepts and things that I'd learned, it was like everything was going at once, that I just basically thought, I've gone too far and I've lost it. So I resigned from all my work, and because I was working with clients here in Australia, I worked with clients in Hong Kong.
Now, was that before you met John Mace?
Before I met.
So you were you were spinning your wheels like I was for years, getting
Absolutely.
nowhere.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. And the clients, I think, Jerry, you and I sort of shared that in one of our conversations. It's the clients that teach you or show.
Oh yeah,
a lot.
Everything I learned from schizophrenics or people who were schizophrenic. They taught me everything I know, everything. I had to pull it out of them, but they taught me.
Exactly. So doing the inner work myself, and then exploring, and then you've got clients that there's this communication, there was something. And I did come to the piece, and I did do a bit of writing. I used to connect and then bring it through as a writing, as I called it. And one of the things that I became aware of is that there was this loop. It's the only way I could communicate it. And so I would call that this patterning loop. And so the clients were going through this patterning loop. So I asked, I connect with my beingness or spirit or guides. There is that higher order, and there are a lot of ways to communicate that. So at the time I connected and I asked, there is this loop, I don't get it. And of course, what I was given was just have this experience. And I had this sensation come over me. And I was like, oh, it's so beautiful. It's like when I swam with the dolphins in Hawaii, and I heard, you just named it. And it stopped. I was like, oh. So then I had another experience given.
Well, what did that mean?
Well, this is what I'm going to come to as part of the premise, even with Mace Energy Method. I think we all come to it and we all know it deep down. But at the point where I was, because I'm trying to investigate, and as you, Sherry, and I have shared, it's only in the experience do you understand. It's not in the thoughts and the asking questions.
Yeah, for sure. The experiences of the reality.
That's right. So in the sense, it was an experience and I'm trying to analyze it. And that's why it was being stopped. I know that now. I didn't quite know that then. So then I had another sensation given to me and I was like, oh, that feels, and I went to name it or it associated. And I heard, you just named it, and it left. So I would sit each Tuesday to work with that. That's what I'd set up to work with, and to work with this principle. And all I heard at the end, I said, and I'm communicating, I don't get it. I sort of get it, but I don't. And I just heard, because it's to do with the mind, dear. That's the last thing I wrote. Then I had my crisis. So in light of resigning from all my work, I resigned from everything. I wasn't interested in spirituality. I wasn't interested in anything. However, I wasn't depressed, which is interesting. I was just very sad and more in resignation. That's it. I'm done. I'm over the game.
Yeah.
So, of course, in that time, life does look after life. That's one thing I became very aware of. It was no longer about thinking about it. I'd lived it many times. And I was invited to work into a natural health retreat, which was one of the first here in Australia to bring integrative and conventional medical doctors and nurses together. And I was asked to come and work there, teach meditation, counseling, and those arenas. However, I said, I'm not interested in any of that type of work at all. But the woman that opened it used to come to my classes, and she was like, what do you mean? She'd created this vision, and she worked with the principles, and she'd created this beautiful, massive retreat, educational center. And she said, come up for a coffee. So I went up, we had a bit of a chat, and she said, look, come and use the place. Come and sit here while you're moving through that. So I had a lovely place to go as I was moving through what I was moving through. Now, there were many components there that, because I'd resigned from everything, it's amazing what I started to hear and see. And one of the biggest premises was I kept hearing all the practitioners and all the medical, we're going to empower people, we're going to do this for people. And instantly I heard, who are we to say that we do that? We don't do it. Mm-hmm. The person who takes your information or comes and does the work, they've empowered themselves by doing it. The person empowers themselves by using the knowledge or information you're sharing.
Yeah, I mean, the only person that can change yourself is you.
Exactly. So you
can take the advice of other people and you can put that to practice, but until you do, in earnest, because that's what you want, if you don't really want it, it's not going to work. Or you don't believe it, it's not going to work. Absolutely. That's what I tell people when I respond to those people that are not schizophrenic. All the schizophrenic requests that I get, I ship off to Jerry because that's not my field. But my field is everybody else. So, and there's plenty of those.
Everybody's a little schizophrenic.
Everybody's a little schizophrenic.
It's a scale. It goes from, it's not zero hardly anywhere.
No, but the ones who have not been diagnosed with schizophrenia, that's who I address or I'll respond to. And I always tell them that, you're the one that can heal yourself. You have to want to do that. You have to want to love yourself enough to spend the time to do it. And a lot of people don't love themselves at all. They can't bring themselves to, well, how can I love myself? Well, then I heard Kathy O'Brien, I don't know if you know her story or not. She was an MK Ultra victim, and she from a child. And she was put into service with the higher echelons in our government, to do all kinds of very, very terrible things. So she, in her healing process, she was told she has to love herself. She has to forgive herself. And she said, I can't do that, but what I can do is be the love that I am. I picked up on that because I was having a hard time loving myself because of all the stuff that went on in my life. And when she said that, it just clicked with me. It's like, yeah, I can be the love that I am. I know I can do that. So that's another way to look at it. So I've been telling people who can't love themselves because they think that all the things that they've done are so terrible that even though God can forgive them and everybody else can forgive them, they can't forgive themselves, but they can be the love that they are.
Sherry, tell them what happened when you send these voices love, the ones that you experienced when you were younger.
Yeah, well,
How did they react to that?
they run away.
Which is very interesting.
And the first time that I told that to Jerry, he's like, I don't know how you can love those guys. I said, well, I don't love them. I send them love. There's a difference. I send them the energy of love. I'm not in love with them. I don't love what they're doing. I hate what they're doing, but I don't hate them. So I can send them cosmic love because they are duped just as much as we are.
And they are.
They are.
Yeah. And that's the nature when people are talking about the spirit or looking at the spirit of who we are. That's what we are. How did, even for you to hear her saying that deep down, you obviously knew you were that. How did you know to even know that you could do that? So that's that peace that lives within. I have no doubt now that is our deep knowing and the true self. Mm-hmm. It's there.
It's there, and once in a while it pops up, and if you're searching and you're seeking, then it will definitely show up. But even when you're not seeking, even when you're living unconsciously, there's this little spark of inner knowing. Absolutely. That pops in every now and again, and it'll catch your attention. You might shove it off right away, but it'll catch your attention for that moment.
So absolutely. Sherry, what did you do with the resort thing where you went there to have the coffee?
Yeah, so that's when I heard exactly what Sherry. It was just like this whole different hearing was happening, which our language is to communicate ideas or what we're trying to point to. But of course, as we all know, there's a lot of cross messaging that can be given. And it was just because I had no interest in anything. I'd let go of all templates, all concepts, everything. I wasn't interested. I could hear it. And so I voiced it into the community of practitioners and doctors. And basically they said, oh, well, look, we know what we're talking about. And I said, but that's a cross message. You're communicating to those people. You don't know more than they do. And it was meaning as for the self, they know they've got a problem. They're actually coming to you. It's like when we go to a doctor, he says, well, what's wrong? And the very first thing he goes, so what's wrong? And we tell them.
Right. And that was the same thing with the schizophrenics. They try to tell psychiatrists these voices are very real. And the psychiatrists go, oh, no, you're wrong. We know better than you. They're hallucinations. Take these drugs and they won't listen. They will not listen.
That's key. That's the key, Jerry. I think the biggest piece of that was this whole different listening came because I wasn't caught. I can say that in hindsight, but I was having the experience. I wasn't caught in any templates. I'd resigned. Wasn't interested in anything. I was just watching them.
I had to fight 8 years of them. All that programming, it's like piece by piece. That's wrong. This is wrong. They're lying about this. They're lying about that. They're deceiving people here. It was just this tangled web of picking piece by piece by piece, trying to follow the crumbs to the truth. And it took years. It took years.
And I said unfolding. And that was when I was starting to hear from a whole different premise. And in light of that, it must have been a point because that's when the woman who owned the center, she said to me, Cherie, could you do guest relations? We're ready to do the grand opening. I said, that I can do. And of course, the very first person that walked in the door was John Avery.
Oh,
John Mace's right-hand man. They were there with the discovery together. And
now, see, that's universe answering your call.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And this is where it gets really defined because I didn't share with anybody that experience I was doing to understand what this loop was or share what I had been given, and I call it in writing. And of course, I sat him down. He was only 74 then. He's 90 now. He's still alive, John Avery. And
Sherry, let me clear up this loop thing. When you're talking about the loop, do you mean the repeated triggering of a loaded issue that's been suppressed?
Yes.
That's what you mean by loop.
Yes. There's
Okay.
this. So I'm aware that there's this loop. So this, anyway, I'll get into that with Mace. That is definitely what Mace, it was the premise I needed to hear to be open to what was ready to be delivered by life. Sherry's spot on.
Mhm.
And so John sat there and said, oh, hello, and what do you do here? And I catharsised in the middle of the foyer of the whole retreat. And I'm not talking, I'm like, ah, ah, ah. So because I had no resistance to anything, I really didn't care. I could hear my own inner world go, oh, no, not now. I'll have to tell the person who owned the retreat, actually, I'm not good to do this job. Anyway, so that's sort of going, and I'm just allowing that to happen. As it started to wane out, I sort of came out and I said, I'm so sorry. I said, listen, and it just came out. And even that concerned me. I said, I'm so sorry. Welcome to, I won't name the place. It doesn't exist anymore anyway. But welcome to this retreat where even the therapists are fucked. And I'm like, oh, I'm in trouble. Sorry.
That
That's
sounds like something
beautiful.
I would do.
That is so beautiful because it's so true.
And this other part of was like, I really need to get out of here and go and get someone else. And John Avery, he did not, his facial features didn't move. He didn't move. He gave a little smile and he said, are you all right, dear? I said, yes, yes. And I'm just going to go and get you someone. And he said, oh, well, it's interesting. He said, I work in the field myself. He said, I might be able to help you with that. I could feel this shift instantly. It was like absolute rebellion. And I was aware of that too. And it was, I actually looked at him with quite an intent and I said, and how is your premise any different? Because I wasn't interested. It actually would irritate me.
So you've already had all the bunk you could take from the
In a
traditional
way, yep, absolutely.
training and all that crap. Yeah. So,
And
so
he never shifted. And of course, we're all watching people's body language. I mean, we're all doing that all the time. He never shifted. And he just said, oh, because he answered the question. He didn't care about my tone. He didn't care. He obviously aware of the shit. He didn't, nothing. He heard the question and he answered it. And he said, oh, it's to do with the mind, dear, which is exactly the last word
wow.
I wrote. I
Wow,
knew
that's what you heard. That's what you heard from the
from
holy
my
cow. Wow. Wow.
So I knew deep down I'd just got a life calling because I'd had many experiences before. Anyway, I said, well, I said, well, give me your card. Again, I felt this other shift. Give me your card, but I'm going to get you someone else. A lot of people were starting to walk in. Anyway, I left. I said to this person, I'm sorry, I really can't help you with that. The next day I woke in the morning and it was so haunting over that I rang John. And I went and had my first Mace session. Absolutely. I got to understand what the loop is. I got to understand what it meant by to do with the mind. And I got to understand the naming of why it was cutting off when you name it. And so my first session, I had a lot of download. It's very personal and it's very fast. It's not linear. I would call that knowing. You know. And of course, in discreating these negative identities or energy ridges, we call them negative identities because they're non-survival. They're low-level thoughts, feelings, concepts at the effect of upsets or trauma. We don't carry, we don't carry an event forward with us. We carry how it made us feel with us. And that's what gets re-triggered. The events aren't triggers. The trigger is, well, sorry, I should say the identity is not the trigger. The events are triggers that keep triggering the same energy ridge. That's why we can become aware that there's a pattern. Awareness starts to go, what is that pattern? So counseling and all the others are sort of taking you back into events and analyzing. You're analyzing. You cannot analyze a feeling. Edward de Bono spoke of that.
Yeah, I've tried that many times and it doesn't work. I mean, there might be a temporary relief, but it always comes back, the same feeling over and over and over again. So until you actually let it go, and that's the mystery of, or to me, it was the mystery of, okay, I know I need to let this go, but how do I do that? How do
And
I
that's
actually let
and
this
that's
go?
that's what
That's why,
Cherie
we're
knows.
here with you, Cherie, today.
Yeah.
To, because the people who are troubled with constant negative thoughts or um, inserted negative messages or voices, whichever, because a lot of people don't hear auditory voices. I didn't hear auditory voices. Um, these were thoughts that were implanted in my brain. And that's what I find that a lot of people are experiencing. And then the ones that are diagnosed with schizophrenia, I guess most of them actually do hear audible voices. Is that right, Jerry?
No, and no,
No.
it's like you say, it's a voice in their head that they know isn't them, but they don't. And most of them don't know what it is.
But is it an audible voice that your patients hear?
Well, some of them, when they get strong enough, those voices actually move outside of their head and talk to them from 2 or 3 feet out, where
Yeah.
they can hear that. But that's fairly rare. They only move outside of the head when they know they have the person under control.
So
But
so
most
your
of the time,
patients are actually having thoughts that
yes.
are, they're not audible voices.
No, they hear them in their head. They're dysfunctional,
Right.
destructive thoughts. But, very few of them are actually hearing voices coming from outside of themselves.
Okay. Yeah. Because
It's
I
the
mean,
nature of the
the,
voices and the
I,
intent of the thoughts. So the intent of those voices is non-survival, like as Cherie would say. They're destructive, they're negative, they're self-defeating, they're they're not like regular thoughts at all. They have patterns of their own.
so I want to clarify something before we go any further, so that everybody knows who's listening to this, because I think the world is under the impression that schizophrenics hear audible voices.
No, not
Okay,
that's
the answer is not necessarily, only
not
in rare
necessarily,
cases.
and
Only.
and mostly it's the more severe ones. It. But otherwise, I told you this situation I was in that time where I prayed to hear them, and they sounded just like my regular voice.
Right, right.
But they were telling me to do stuff that it would kill me if I did it.
Yeah.
So I
So I
knew that
wanted to
wasn't
make,
my intent, but it
I,
sounded just like all the other thousands of voices, that I hear every day. There was no change of timbre. There was no change of amplitude. It sounded just like a regular thought, only the intent was so different from anything that I would do. It's like you have a thought that barges into your head that tells you to kill somebody or to beat somebody or to cut somebody, or that's not your regular thought. You would never act on that. You would never do that. Matter of fact, it shook you up to even have that thought.
oh, hold on a minute. I'm going to put you on mute.
I don't know if she's still recording or not.
Yes, it's still recording.
Well, you know what I'd like you to go into,
Yep.
is for me, the nuts and bolts of how this works is very fascinating. So when John was talking about the trauma, focusing down the awareness to a pinpoint set, and that set has to do with the individual and nothing else.
Yes.
It's a pro survival decision made at that time to get out of that particular situation, but it's kind of burned into the subconscious or burned into the conscious, and it stays there,
Yes.
as an energetic entity in and of itself.
Yes. And how, so coming into Mace energy method, and the body of knowledge is called causism. They're the principles and the natural laws that John became aware of, and especially being a mariner, ship's master mariner. I mean, he was sailing ships with sextants. There were no computers, so he understood law of magnetism, energy, all of those basic laws, which, I mean, people and listening can certainly go and read his book, which is beautifully and simply laid out in its principles. But the one thing that we're working with as the premise is it's pretty well accepted we're mind, body, soul, or spirit. He coined that spirit an energy being to take out any dogmas, because we can all agree, and physics is proven, everything is energy.
Right.
Without energy operating this body, we have a corpse, and nothing works.
And psychiatry and psychology don't seem to get that.
No. So they're working with bodies. The causism and the Mace energy method is we're working with you. And when we're speaking to you, we're not talking to your body or your mind. We're talking to you. Awareness. The spirit. Or energy being. That is the intelligence. We didn't have language until we were 2. It's something we learn. And look how we operate. Children are magnificent how they pick up things and start pointing for food and just picking up the patterns. There's no language. They start to learn that because we're teaching them. So if you had no language and if you took off all your roles and identities, what's left?
Be like a child.
Yeah. And so then we put all that on because there's functions to play in life with them. So this is where it got very confused. John was interested in the spiritual component of man to see how that moves then in our nature or the material. And of course, psychology, meaning psyche and ology, is the study of the psyche, which means soul or spirit. And he talks a little bit, not a lot, but about Wundt. And that's what he was doing. But of course, you can't measure it. It's intangible. And so that's when he trained some Americans. And of course, they took it back. And it became all the behavior. It became qualifying the behavior. But where's this behavior coming from? Behavior means to have, to have. And yet if we listen to our language enough, we always say it's my body, my, who's this my? And one of the things that John would say is, you can see your body, can't you? Be like, yes. He said, can you see the you that's looking at it? No. Because the being is of the energy universe. It's energy. It's invisible. No color, no weight. So here's the premise shift that he found that starts to help us hone into what you were talking about. So energy is pure potential. It's perfect. You can have energy create into different forms, but essentially it is energy and it is perfect. So therefore, if you are that, that is you. But of course, we've come into form, material universe, and we have a body and a mind. The big shift came when he discovered the premise of the mind. And you said that a little bit earlier, and so I'll deliver that now. The mind has none of the abilities attributed to it in the past.
And what's so important about this is that this concept is functional. It actually works. I mean,
Yes.
It's a system that works. So,
Yeah.
you know, all these psychologists and clinical psychologists and psychiatrists, they say, oh, no, that's not the mind, you know, like Sigmund Freud in there, you know. No, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. And that's one of the reasons psychoanalysis kind of fell by the sideline, because it didn't work real well. And when when antipsychotic drugs were invented by accident, they were found by accident in a dye manufacturing process in Europe. And the psychiatrist found that, yeah, hey, this thing will tranquilize people, and we can drug entire psychiatric hospitals and keep them under control. They snatched onto that drug and they just went from there. So the concept of the real mind was down the tubes. Now they went to the brain, and they're going, well, everything is the brain, a physical organism, but they haven't ever found a thought in the brain. You know, they haven't ever done an autopsy and found any thought in the brain. And when the brain dies, all the thoughts go away. And when people who've died and come back, they're still thinking. They're still talking about thoughts that they're
Correct.
thinking.
Correct.
You know, so
And that's
here comes something that actually works coming on the scene, and that's why we want to. That's why we're talking to you. This works.
Yeah. So with that premise shift, because I've come through a lot of things where we talk about the mind, and the mind's full of thoughts and it's full of chatter. Well, no, it's not. There is the beingness, which is the awareness, but that full of that chatter is what we'll come into is negative identities. It is one of the other key components to the discovery of what created the simple method, the Mace energy method. So the first one is the premise to do with the mind. The mind's only ability is to create images and pictures of what you have your attention on. So we liken it to a computer. The computer hard drive stores all the knowledge and data. The monitor is your mind, the keyboard is your six senses, and the mouse is your attention. So the monitor doesn't think, it's just throwing up images and pictures. So to give everyone an example of that, we say that in a session to help them understand and what we're naturally utilizing to do this session. There's no invention, this is a discovery. So it's just naturally how we're made up. So think about an apple, and what color are you looking at?
Red.
Think about an elephant. What are you looking at?
Gray.
Beautiful. So the mind doesn't think. It's you who owns the province of that. So don't think of an elephant. And what are you looking at?
An elephant.
Yeah, so you're thinking, don't think of an elephant. And it's just throwing up. It will create willy-nilly. So in understanding that, your mind has an amazing ability to create images and pictures of what you understand. And if you look at your understanding, it is all abstract. It's the intangibles, feelings. We sense them. We can't see them. We might see them play out through a body or the effect of them, but it's all the intangibles. So is spirit. So that's why you can't measure it. And that's why people in the game of measuring all this and behavior, it's send a cross message because they know what they're feeling. They know what they're experiencing, but then it all gets contextualized into all sorts of concepts. So the mind has an amazing ability to create images and pictures of feelings, concepts, or ideas that you understand. So if I said to you, think about love and just all that love means to you, and what's the first image that appears?
Well, my wife and my dogs.
Beautiful. So we don't analyze the image, but it certainly tells us you know what love means to you. And of course, obviously, there's a lot of feeling and connection there with your family. So in understanding that, so coming back to not naming the feeling, but we will make an image or a picture, and that tells us that you understand what that feeling means to you, because the mind will not make an image of something you do not understand. It's just a stimuli response mechanism. So it doesn't think, it creates willy-nilly. And just to give you an example of that, and for the people listening, if they want to give it a go, is I want you to think of an.
Think of a what?
So stop. I've done that on purpose. Can you feel yourself scanning?
But I'm not sure I heard what you said.
Yeah, I did that on purpose. But even though you didn't hear what I said, can you feel yourself scanning?
Yeah.
You're trying to look for what I'm saying. So it's almost like putting in a search bar, I'm looking for something in the hard drive, and it does that scanning. And it scans, and no files come up if it's not there. And even though I'm talking to you consciously, you can still feel yourself scanning because I have asked something. It's stimuli response. I've asked a direct question, so part of you is going to be scanning. Now, is your mind made any image?
No.
No, because you haven't landed on anything yet. So I'm going to stop the scanning and I'm going to ask you to think about a dog, and what are you looking at?
My dog.
Beautiful. What type is it?
It's a white husky.
Beautiful. So can you feel that the scanning has now stopped?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically what you're saying is in order to deal with an emotion that is intangible and doesn't conform to the physical universe, you ask the person to form an image of that emotion.
So we don't even ask the person to form an image because a person can't create an image. I'm going to ask you, create an image, Jerry. And what's the first thing your natural response to me is?
Of what?
Correct. You have to have your attention on something.
What if it was, okay, create an image of your depression?
Great.
What would it
That
look
you
like?
can do. You have to have your attention on something. That's what attention is. We're big, vast, unlimited beings. I say to people, do you know what's inside your hard drive? Do you know everything that's there? And they go, no. I have to ask a question for them to go, oh, yes, I might have something about that.
So
The
is what you're...
mind has its own function. The mind is the interface between the energy universe and the material universe, and its function is to create images or pictures, as we call it. So in some theories in the past, it's like they'd say we think in pictures. No, we actually have this province to, it's an intelligence that can think, and then the mind follows very quickly with an image. Because imagine a computer without a monitor. You wouldn't quite know where you're at. So here's where people go, oh, I have to form an image. I just want to give clarity because that was a very good question, is that the client doesn't make the image. That's what the mind will do naturally. We keep the client's attention on the feeling.
Oh, and then ask them to come up with the image.
So no, they just keep the attention on the feeling. The mind will do its own job and it will create an image. But it is willy-nilly.
So do you have to ask them to create that image?
No.
So you just say, focus on your depression and tell me what you see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So what you're doing is you're taking a concept and making it more something that you can do something with.
Because it's a feeling. That's the difference. You can't analyze concepts or mental constructs. Feelings control our life. So that's what John found. You know, that's one of the premise shifts. But the fourth element, or the missing link, is what he called identities. Now, identities are the various roles that we play in life. They're the mask, persona. But they're purposeful. We have positive roles and identities. And of course, we have what we call negative identities. Now, we create everything in our own universe. You cannot inject a feeling into somebody. Because if that was true, I'll inject my joy into everyone else and we'll all be good. I've actually said that to clients, and I've had quite a few of them say, but I don't want yours, I want mine. The very nature they say that is they know they already own that. So, but the law is you cannot inject a feeling into someone else. So people actually don't make us, I didn't put a feeling in you make me angry. No, that person has activated an old energy ridge or identity, I'll get into that, that you're now re-experiencing. But the beauty of that principle can sometimes be, well, the negative of that, it can be perceived as that is, oh, I create everything. Well, that can be hard to take when it's on the negatives. We love it when it's on the positives. However, the principle of that means if you created it, means you can discreate it.
I want to interject something right here, because when you talk about how other people can't make you feel angry or laughing, or I mean that you just, your mind has to create that feeling. Well, that was the one thing that I read in this book when I was doing my searching for what was wrong with me. I think, I don't know if I told you the story or not, but I know Jerry knows it. I walked into a library and I was looking for something to read on this topic, but I didn't know where to look. And as I was browsing around, a book fell off the shelf and actually hit my foot. So, and I opened up the book randomly, and the first thing I saw was something that literally changed my life. I bought the book and went home and I read the whole thing. And when I got to that part again, what it said was, you're in control of your thoughts. Nobody can make you feel one way or the other. You're the only one that can do that. I didn't know that. I had no idea that that was the case. So that literally put me on a completely different path. Completely. It changed my life completely. That one little sentence. That's amazing.
Yeah. And it gives us a lot of, you know, while we're identified with the negative feeling, we don't like hearing it, but this is where we start to separate it, especially Maces. You are not a feeling and you are not a thought. It's something you are experiencing. There is this you before the feeling and the thought. So yes, it's quite an impact, like, oh, I generate my own. Therefore, natural law is you can discreate it. So just coming back into the Mace premise, where we come from, it's pretty well accepted: mind, body, soul, spirit. We coin it energy being. There's a fourth element, a missing link, which we call identities. Now, that's not a new name. People talk about that in many ways. But here's the shift. When we're working with you, we're working with you, the energy being, the all-pervading, that has a body, has a mind, and can create identities. They're just roles that we play. So, you know, I have a role as a MACE practitioner. I'm a grandmother, I'm a mother, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter. They're just all material universe, you know, ways of categorizing. And even my name is an identity. My body's an identity.
So we're a
And that's
figment of our own imagination.
in a way.
Yeah.
So but we confuse, Elsie, and what you just found, and I liked what you said, Sherry, is I didn't know that before. See, we're not taught this. We're not taught about ourselves growing up. We're taught about the system and really roles and identities and how to play.
Well, what we are taught that is that all our thoughts belong to us.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and
And thoughts, if you look, what is a thought? A thought is a sentence which is made up of words. We're taught that. So a thought is actually a past tense, and that's why it's just a repeated sentence. To think or to reason to me is more present tense. But a thought is really just words in a sentence. But once you give attention or energy to anything, it gives it life, gives it meaning or identification. So when we talk about identities, we've got positive identities, which mean pro-survival. They feel good and right to you. We keep it as simple as that. We're not going to come under cultural laws, religious law, any of them. Because what I can do here in this country, and it has a positive role for me, I take it to another country that has different laws. It's not going to be pro-survival for me to do that. So we just leave that part alone. We're working with you. So positive identities, we mean pro-survival to you, but negative identities we do create, but we accidentally create them. Because would anybody knowingly create something against themselves? And the answer obviously has to be no, or there would be no self-help industry.
Well, now, let me just interject something here, because my perception of the universe at large is that we've been invaded, this planet has been invaded by negative, what some people call the fallen ones. And I'm recently calling them the fallen ones too, where these fallen ones decided that they can do better than God, and they don't like doing God's work, and they want to do their own thing, and they want to own everything, they want to control everything. So they came and invaded this planet that was a beautiful planet. It still is a beautiful planet in some places, but at that time it was a really beautiful planet. The people on the planet, the humans, didn't even know about negativity. They just loved each other, and they were brilliant. They were scientifically brilliant, they were technologically brilliant, they were spiritually brilliant. But they got invaded by these aliens that came, and they were welcomed in the first place. But through their advanced technology, the humans here got tricked into letting them have their way. And in some cases, they took their way without our permission. So they messed with our minds, they messed with our DNA, and we have a memory of that even today. Even though we have a genetic memory or a spiritual memory or some kind of memory of that, it's in us. We know that. Whether we know it consciously or not, we know that. So I'm thinking that the negative thoughts that we have, the negative experiences we have, are partly from reacting to those ancient memories. And then we open up the door for more negativity to come in. What are your thoughts?
So the nature of what I say to a client, and I'm going to use that one principle even as it moves out into that more, there are many levels of consciousness and many, lots that we don't understand. But what I came across is there's one principle, one law manifesting. Even your cell replicates. So everything replicates a truth on any level. So as I say to a client that comes, and they've had a lot of trauma and a lot of negativity, and of course it's playing out in their relationship, their work, they become aware of the patterns. I've done all this work, but it's still there. So you can do that in time, or if we had ancient time, past life, right here now, because what I experienced at 5 is a past life. What I did yesterday is a past life. I don't bring events forward with me. We only bring the memory of it. So if that is being, so whatever triggers the identity, here's where the game of the identity. So negative identities are unknowingly created, which is truly an energy ridge. What happens when we feel something comes towards us we do not like, and that's what we class as an upset, anything you didn't want to have happen. You're going to use your energy to resist that feeling. It's a pro-survival act at the time. But of course, we consciously just get on moving. We don't come back after the event and go, oh, okay, everything's okay, and I'll take my energy out of that resisted feeling and process it. This all happens when we're young. But it's a natural way that we're just made up. We're not in charge of it consciously. You have to become aware of it. So, of course, we've resisted a feeling. And of course, I get back on with life and living. We're big beings, we're a lot of energy, and we just keep moving. But of course, I'm moving that within my psyche with me. So something else comes along and triggers that same feeling. I'm going to have to slow this down because we're a fast operating system. I'm not talking the conscious. So, of course, we go, oh, there's that feeling. I'm going to give it some more energy and resist it. But of course, the more energy you give in resistance, the more you start to identify with it. That's why we start going, you know, I love my children and da-da-da, but, you know, I'm a really bad mother. Where did that come?
Yeah.
You know, it's so we start to identify with these negative thoughts and feelings. Because once we use our energy to resist that feeling, which is no longer real time, everything is just, we allowed everything to flow. It's being felt and it's over. But of course, this is done as we're growing up. So that's why when people step into meditation, I was one of them. They're being told to do all these things. And yes, at times they can, because there's no negatives in the field. But when they're trying to do it to stop a negative feeling, it's like, don't think of an elephant. Can't do it.
So then,
That's the trap. So to come back to the question, so even if we did create something way back and using that analogy, you know, that principle that you've just shared, it's the same principle. If we were happy and outflowing and something came along, and whether it's an upset, what you'd call someone has told a lie or done something, you know, the act of that, there is a feeling that happened for you, but what we do is we resist the feeling. And so that sits there from then on out. But
And
of course,
that's constantly draining your energy while you're resisting.
Constantly be doing, yes. But what happens is the second thing, that's the first energy ridge, identity we create, negative identity, is we're making decisions 24/7, whether we realize it or not. And of course, so when you're hungry, you decide to what?
Eat.
And when you're thirsty, you decide to what?
Drink.
You know, so there's these natural things. Look at babies, they have no language. And there's these mechanisms, I call them naturally innate within us already. So again, this is one of those principles. So we resist the feeling. What's going to happen is we're going to make a decision about it. But unfortunately, because when we're bringing in our energy to use to resist, we let go of the outside world. There is no outside world. There is only really our point of view. Is we're going to make a decision about ourselves. We accidentally shoot ourselves in the foot. We make a decision about ourselves as a person. And because it's a low-level feeling, that decision is going to match. It's going to be a low-level decision. So we give practical examples. Could you see an angry, raging person making a happy decision? No.
No, you can't think positive.
Yeah.
You can't feel
No.
positive while you're thinking negative. And yeah.
So it's all vibrational. And that's where, you know, by doing the inner work, it could also absolutely, what you and Jerry have been doing, you'll disidentify with any of the outside forces or energy. So, but coming back to, so this decision, the moment you name energy, it'll act. It's neutral. So if you've made a decision, I'm not good enough, it sits there. And then, of course, each time these are triggered, you're giving it more energy and resistance. You identify with it. And that's why you start walking around going, I'm not good enough. You become identified with it and act out as that lesser person. but it's your power and potential unknowingly being given to this decision in resistance. So the whole purpose of the mace is to bring your energy and potential out of that resistance. And those thoughts and feelings then do not exist because they're not real time to start with, and they do not exist without your potential. And of course, that's when people feel that the energy ridge has been discreated. They cannot say, I'm not good enough. They laugh. You know, I get to the mistake of you say not good enough. They start laughing, going, it's not there. I can't speak it. No. It's deleted. So we see negative identities as the virus in the computer that mucks up your natural system. So even if we had a civilization and we were, you know, the fallen had started to maneuver and manipulate with this type of negative energy, we can still become a charge back at cause, come back to thyself, and not be at effect. And of course, both of you shared earlier in the piece, a positive, a negative cannot handle positive.
Right. So that's kind of what I'm saying, that
Yeah.
the whole idea that we were invaded and by people by beings that were not from here, and we were messed with. That's history. That happened. Okay. So now we have the memory of it, and we can say, oh, that's why I'm having that feeling. Okay, I'm remembering that, so I don't have to give it any energy, but I can understand it. That, you know, if I understand more about what happened to us as a human race, then I guess for me, I'm more at peace. It was a horrible thing that happened, but but that was in the past. It's still got reverberations to this day. Right. And I look out at the world and I see all these crazy people running around. They you know, they're not there. They're like walking zombies. And I'm like, oh, well, but you know, if I could only, I mean, I understand why they're doing that. If I could only get the message out to them that, okay, well, this is why you're doing this. But the thing is, when they're that lost, they don't want to be found.
Well, they don't. This is deep down, they've become completely identified. So if I just use society today, we've grown up in a history and society that's got a lot of concepts and ideas, and every identity we create is in that system. But you are not your identities. That's why people have crises in their life, or they have these moment existential, like, what am I doing? What am I doing this for? Because we are not our roles. We're just not. And so what we do is, who in the world hasn't had an upset?
Nobody.
And of course, we create these energy ridges in our own psyche by an upset. So of course, over time, if you just take, you know, there's an old one in Born to Win, give me the child from 0 to 7 and I'll give you the man tomorrow.
Yeah.
That really means the self-image that they start to unknowingly create about themselves, image about relationships, and images of the world or concepts within it, because we do have the power to change that. But what that really means is that's the first context, how we start to perceive ourselves, how we start to perceive relationships, because that's what we're growing up in, and the world around us. And that gets carried on.
If I can interject something here, I've spoken about this before, that from the age of 0 to 7, our minds, our brains are actually working in a theta state, and so that's how we're designed to learn our environment, to learn our language, to learn the rules, you know, to learn to survive. Well, we do this without rational thinking, because that's not what's going on in our brains during those years. So we are impressed with everything we see and everything we hear as truth. So if we come up with, if we have most parents will, you know, say things to their children that will affect them for the rest of their lives, and they don't even know they said it. It wasn't malevolent, in other words.
So it's feelings that control our world. So that's like that impression, absolutely. And this is what we've found. And that's where people, when they have their first May session, they end up running the very first identity, which has started young. You know, it might show up in an upset here, but we know that it's been created way back. But it's the feeling. We don't bring events forwards or the other thing is when we do hear some of these negative thoughts, you're absolutely correct, as in the thoughts, not the feeling, is we've heard it. And of course, we know deep down it's not true. That's why you say to a 4-year-old, you're not good enough. You'll see their energy puff up. That makes their body big and they go, I am so. They will resist it. And of course, when you've got an outside force, that if there is then harm or smacked or any of these things, we're naturally pro-survival. It's a bit like we won't say that again. So, you know, we're using a bit of resistance to the feeling. So the very nature that we're resisting what other people say means we have carried it in our universe. We're resisting the thoughts from our universe. Mm-hmm. That's why you do have the power to discreate that as well. And I've had a lot of clients who's, you know, myself included, I don't have those thoughts anymore. They're not in my field. They're deleted out of my whole psyche.
Now, when you and I talked, when we had our session, I was filled with profound sadness. And that went back to the original first 7 years.
Yeah.
Now I can still remember those things. I'm just not triggered by them anymore.
Correct.
Thanks to your session. Yes. So what I'm thinking about is Jerry's patients. He knows how to cure the schizophrenia, and we know how to get rid of the voices. But the voices will return at some point to test the waters. The patients need to be prepared to not let those triggers trigger, or to not have those triggers, period. So that's where you come in.
Yeah. And as you shared in the beginning, and both of you have shared, is most people dealing with this manifestation has had a lot of trauma. So coming back to what you were saying, just to tie that up in light of the history, and we just do society, and then of course our own growing up in the conditions, is the more upsets that person has had and the more trauma, the bigger and more the negative identities. And that's when we see someone or that we call a negative person. We can all even be sitting next to someone and go, I don't like the feel of that person. We're energetic beings. It's all feeling and sensing. But what that tells us from our point of view, because we don't handle manifestations, we head for the cause. That's why it was called causism. And the cause is one resisted feeling. We're going to bring your energy, because those thoughts and feelings are not you. It feels real at the time when you're in them, but it's not you. You bring your energy and potential out of them, that all discreates. You can't speak it, you can't feel it, you can't act it again. But those with big manifestations means that there are a lot more, there's been a lot more upset and trauma. And of course, that is where we observe and see where people are lost, or to try and communicate that to them, they're not going to hear. So it's a bit like, as we've journeyed, we've had blue sky and clouds, but there's been quite a bit of blue sky. And the blue sky is you. The clouds are the changing forms, roles, identity, forms, but these people just see clouds.
So, Cherie, can you go a little bit into how you drain that energetic field that is stuck, the ridges?
Yeah. So this is where we bring it all in together, and that's where reading John's book will put this more into its principles and context. So, and he's done a beautiful job. So basically, we express that there's, you know, pretty well accepted mind, body, soul, but the fourth element. So
that's John Mash's book called Causism. Okay,
yeah.
that's what Cherie's talking about, and it's an excellent book. I've read it 5 times already, I think.
Yeah. So what we're doing is introducing the concepts of identities, meaning there are roles. We have positive, but we also have negative. We leave all of you alone. We're honing in on these negative identities, because negative identities are the source of all depression, compulsive behavior, low self-esteem, post-traumatic stress. You name any manifestation, it's a part of that. They are the source, not you. That's the source of the problem. So, of course, then we introduce and let them know. We help them find, via an upset, the resisted feeling and the decision, and that's part of the process. I won't go too much into that because I don't want to be triggering anyone. We do that part, and then we let the client know and experience about the mind. And it happens for everybody. And then we just say, we're going to tap into that feeling. I want you just to feel it, and your mind's going to produce an image. You can't create it. It'll just happen. And the mind doesn't think, it creates willy-nilly. So we've had from donuts to dinosaurs, squiggly lines, and they'll go, oh, so they're feeling it. We're a guide more than anything. That's all we are, as a guide. And they'll say they've got an image. From that point, it becomes an observing game, and they just observe it. And we observe it till it's completely gone. What that is and what happens there is the natural law of energy must gather unto itself, and it will bring back unto its source. So what happens is the natural discreation process happens, and the image disappears. It tells us that all the thoughts and feelings have disappeared. But we ask the client knows themselves better than anyone, and we say, are you feeling that feeling anymore, or can you say these thoughts, concepts? And they go, no, it's gone, and I feel lighter or more at peace. That's when we say, welcome home, that's the real you. There has only ever been the real you. It's negative identities, these thoughts and feelings we've accidentally identified with, that only bring us down, but they're not a self, and they never ever will be. So it's just like the energy or the fallen angels. There is one source if there is God, and therefore they are from them.
Precisely.
So therefore they have no power over. It's
That's
just
right.
positive energy and potential trapped in some sort of negativity. Or, when I found out what sin actually meant in its true meaning, it's something that you're not, which is like a negative identity. It's not you. The real you's perfect.
Right, and the religions, many religions, and especially the Christian religion, teaches that we were born into sin. Well,
That concept.
that's
Bad.
Yeah, that's not right, because
We've got
that's not
such
true.
old society concepts, absolutely, and I have a lot of clients who, especially on the spiritual journey, some of these concepts will come up. Because remember, you're absolutely right. We're impressed with all these things. We're influenced with all these things. And a lot of the time, people think they're thinking, but they're just repeating what they've heard.
Yeah, all of who we are, all of who we think we are, comes from other people, other impressions. They don't come from us, because
Correct.
that's not who we are.
So that's a bit of our journey. That's why John coined things, or we do, who's the real you, discover the real you, find the real you. It's been pointers in so many ways, and that's how each of us, even coming together, we started a path and a journey in very different ways, but it's got such a common goal. I wanted to know thyself. I wanted to understand what all that was. And of course, I took my paths, and then of course you want to understand others, and then you want to help others, and it comes to that same purpose somehow. Everything.
Cherie, you're doing such a wonderful thing for us and for the world. I think we should ask you to come back, because we've gone overtime. So we're going to have to close this down now. And I love having you here. I'm going to put John Mace's book in the show notes. And then, so would you be willing to come back and talk to us again?
Absolutely. I enjoy our conversations, and I love how it can open up, because deep down, we all know there is something more, or we wouldn't be seeking to start with. And there's many points of view. We can only have our point of view. But what I start to notice happening is there's this beautiful common thing that starts to show up in the center. And that's what by sharing and talking and people listening, and that touches awareness. It touches deep down inside. And then can handle. I liked how you said something small empowered me, and then I took the path. So someone may hear and go, oh, there's Jerry to help with this, and Sherry can help with that. And, you know, it's really about walking each other home.
It's a triangle. and I know that we want to see this for the entire world. Well, Jerry, do you have any final words?
Well, yeah. The last thing what Cherie said is these images have no energy of their own. You give them all the energy they have, and you maintain that energy. The same thing we know is true with the psychotic voices. Those voices have no energy of their own. They have to get it from us. And they drain us. And schizophrenics will tell you when the voices attack, their energy disappears. The voices take it. So they have no energy of their own. They are milking us like we milk cows.
We're the powerful ones. Okay, folks, I got to shut down the recording. And thank you so much, Cherie, for coming on and blessing us with your wisdom and your information. We really appreciate it. And we'll sign off for now.